Welcome to this chapter on the autonomic nervous system. In this chapter, we're going to focus on the control that's going to our involuntary system. So all those things that you don't think about, your blood vessels, your glands, your internal organs, how they're being controlled. We're mostly going to concentrate on the motor part of that. And the motor's divided into somatic and autonomic nervous systems. So we'll look at the difference between those two and then get into sympathetic versus parasympathetic divisions. So if we look at our overall structure of our nervous system, we've been talking about our central nervous system, brain and the spinal cord. And then the spinal cord is going to be sending information out and receiving information from the periphery. So we call that the peripheral nervous system. That's going to have sensory coming in and motor coming out, like I said. And that motor, which is what we're focusing on today, is divided into autonomic and somatic nervous systems. Somatic is going to all of your skeletal muscle, so that's under volitional control. And autonomic is everything else, and that's divided up into these two systems, sympathetic and parasympathetic. So this is primarily involving homeostasis of our internal environment. Like I said, these are going to be visceral efferent, so we're talking about the motor component that's going out to innervate our smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and all of our glands. We can get a nice little comparison of those two systems here. Up on top, we're looking at our somatic nervous system, and in there we have this lower motor neuron, or you've heard me call it alpha motor neuron. This is a multipolar neuron, and you can see it's myelinated, and it's going straight out to skeletal muscle, and it's sending out its neurotransmitter acetylcholine. Well, the autonomic nervous system is a little bit different. Here you can see on the left, we've got our autonomic nervous system divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic, and the nerves in those two are a little bit different, and we're going to be going through all of them. But you'll notice that instead now they're going to our smooth muscle. So these are like blood vessels, or they can be smooth muscle around your digestive system, your gastrointestinal tract. Our glands, our external or our exocrine glands, like your sweat glands, and your endocrine glands, like your pancreas and thyroid and adrenal glands. There's a lot of different endocrine glands, and our cardiac muscle, so your heart. So they're innervating. Those are the primary things that they're innervating. And again, it's all involuntary control. So it's not information coming from your cortex directly. It's coming from those brain centers that are a little bit lower. And the big difference here that you'll notice is that we've got two neurons in a row instead of just one axon of the nervous system. So if we are the somatic nervous system. So if we discontinue looking at that somatic nervous system and just focus on these, you'll see they all have their cell bodies are going to be in the spinal cord, and from there they go out. And we're going to see that in the next couple slides. And something else I want you to notice here too, just because this is a good picture of it. This first neuron, which we call the preganglionic neuron, has myelin on it in all of these cases. That's what all these little circles around the axon are. And then they hit a ganglion, which in the peripheral nervous system is just a collection of cell bodies. So they're going to synapse on the next neuron in a ganglion. For the most part, the adrenal medulla or the adrenal gland is a little bit different. I'll tell you about that a little bit later. And then they're going to synapse onto this postsynaptic neuron, which you're seeing right here. And the postsynaptic neurons are in dotted lines in this drawing because they are not myelinated. And that's going to make a little difference in how they operate. The main thing from this, though, is to recognize we got preganglion and postganglion neurons in both our sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. So this drawing, you can see the preganglionic and the postganglionic neurons a little bit more clearly, and this is where they're synapsing on each other in the ganglion. I'll talk about where those ganglions exist in a minute. But the cell bodies for this preganglionic neuron, or the cell body, is going to exist in the central nervous system. So it's going to exist in basically one of two places, either up in the midbrain and hindbrain of the brainstem, or in the spinal cord. In the spinal cord, it's going to exist in the lateral horn. And if you forget that, let me just draw that out for you real quick here. So if we were to take a cross section of the spinal cord, I could draw it right up here. And here's my spinal cord. Now, in the lateral horn of the spinal cord is where we're going to find the cell body. So here's our lateral horn right between the dorsal horn and the ventral horn. And this neuron is going to come out, and just for schematic purposes, I'll keep it the same. It's going to have a synapse here. So this is the pre-ganglionic, and I'll just write G for ganglionic. And it's going to synapse onto a post-ganglionic neuron. That's going to come down to our effector, whether it's smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, or gland. And the synapse here is going to be in this ganglion. Now this is different than the alpha motor neuron or the lower motor neuron that we talked about before, because remember that motor neuron cell body is going to be in the ventral horn, and it's going to come out and go to its effector muscle, which will be skeletal muscle. All right, that's what those alpha motor neurons go to. So a little different than those smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, or glands. Now the cell bodies for these post-ganglionic neurons, they're going to exist in ganglions, which are going to be somewhere up in the head or the neck or the abdomen, or you can see a big long chain of them that we call paravertebral ganglions, and we're going to show you that in the next set of slides. So now let's just put together the somatic and autonomic nervous systems into one little chart. If we start by looking at the cell bodies, we're going to notice that the somatic system, that cell body is in the ventral horn. We've got one neuron going all the way out to its effector. In the autonomic nervous system, we're going to have a preganglionic neuron. Its cell body is here in this lateral horn. It's going out to this autonomic ganglion where it synapses on the postganglionic neuron, and that's going to its effector organs. So one neuron somatic, two neurons autonomic. The neurotransmitter in the somatic we said was always going to be acetylcholine. And in the autonomic nervous system, it's going to be either epinephrine or norepinephrine. As far as the neurotransmitter goes, you're going to see it primarily being norepinephrine. Or we'll also see some of them having acetylcholine, and I'll tell you about the differences in those later. Somatic, always excitatory. Autonomic, it can be excitatory or inhibitory. And remember, there's different types of receptors that are going to make the difference there. Those receptors are going to be ionotropic at the motor end plate of the somatic muscle, because remember, ionotropic for acetylcholine are always going to be excitatory. Specifically, remember, acetylcholine is a nicotinic type of ionotropic. And in the autonomic nervous system, we're going to see metabotropic, so they're going to be using G proteins. Effector skeletal muscle in somatic, effector cardiac smooth and glands in autonomic. And then just a little quick thing on the neurons here. The neurons in the somatic system, they're going to be fast. They're going to those skeletal muscles to make a quick reaction, and the thicker neurons are able to get their action potential out more quickly. So they're going to be thick, they're going to be fast, and they're going to be myelinated the entire way. In the autonomic nervous system, remember we've got two different neurons here. These guys are going to tend to be pretty thin. So we're looking at 1 to 3 micrometers versus 9 to 13 micrometers. So these guys are almost 10 times as thick as some of the autonomics. The preganglionic ones tends to be a little bit thicker than the postganglionic ones, so those will be like your 3 micrometers and maybe 1 micrometer out here. And notice that preganglionics have thin myelination to them. Postganglionics are unmyelinated. So that's what's going to make this whole system slower to react. And that wraps up the differences between our autonomic and somatic systems.